It is the dream of every B2B SaaS startup founder from India and other growing economies to enter the US market. The US market provides the ultimate litmus test to the product and its growth potential. To discuss sales strategies required in the early stages of your US market entry, I have with me today Josh Billow. Josh is the sales director at Redpoint Global. Well, Josh is actually a seasoned sales leader with over 20 years of experience working in the US market in various sales roles. And in our discussion today, we're going to be talking about insights that can drive sales success for SaaS startups entering the US market. So, Josh, welcome to this fireside chat, and you've got a fantastic background out there.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in Chicago. It's sunny. As a matter of fact, I'm by my fire pit, which I thought would be close enough to a fireside chat. So,
Yeah,
thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
yeah. Absolute delight, Josh. So, Josh, the starting point for a SaaS startup looking to enter the US market is actually establishing the product market fit. And, I've seen different ways that actually companies are actually doing this. You have, several companies which, look to acquire customers who have the main business in the home country of the startup, and also some business in the US. And that's really a good way of getting into the US market, because you don't really need to deal with decision makers in the US. So perhaps a nice way of getting a decent understanding about how your product fits into the scheme of things in the US. Now, apart from that, of course, there are other ways that some companies do it. Sometimes they land a few clients using their inside sales team, or they have some contacts that the founders may have or the investors may have, which opens a few doors. And then, of course, there could be some accelerators which help along the way. We'll talk about accelerators a little down the line. But Josh, I just wanted to get your thoughts in terms of what should be the ideal approach for establishing a product market fit for a SaaS company entering the US. And please feel free to, however, also to give examples from maybe companies which are US based as well, which are trying to establish their product market fit.
Yeah, good question. Before I jump in, just want to add that all these are my opinions, and they're not Redpoint Global's opinions. I'm talking to you from Josh Billow, as opposed to Redpoint Global. So I want to make that clear. That's always been a question, right? And in working with several companies that have been international companies, one of the challenges is how do you go to market in the US? And a lot of them try to place one salesperson, first of all, in the US, see how it goes, and have them start knocking on doors.
Right.
Where I've seen it successful is really the channel strategy. You find some channel partners where they see a niche, where they can make some money, where there's a product fit. And you see how they do. You hire a channel manager, an in-market, in US channel manager, and then start expanding as the market starts developing.
Yeah, okay. I think that's an interesting strategy, Josh. But I think one of the big issues that a company which is trying to enter the US is that, I mean, they really do not know how to go about, identifying, a channel. But we'll come to that. I have some questions around partnerships as well.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that I was reading, if you really look at, is that if you look at, the market typically around the world, there are three segments at a very high level. One is companies which are perhaps born in the cloud. There are some companies, second category, which are older companies but which are migrating to the cloud. and thirdly, companies which are not on the cloud and perhaps not interested to get onto the cloud. So I guess for a lot of startups, very logical, a lot of SaaS companies, a logical target audience perhaps would be companies that are already on the cloud. But having said that, I want to link the product market fit to really how do we really define the ideal customer profile. Because really I think the ability of a company to articulate and give specifics of what that ideal customer would be, can actually add a lot of value, and it really improves the overall selling power as well. Now, it's really about who you want to sell to, as opposed to who wants to buy your product, and that really is the basis of a lot of the strategy that companies would like to implement. So, Josh, how do you think a company can go about establishing their ideal customer profile? And that's a very critical activity, right? I mean, you're coming from another country and you are entering the US. I mean, you have an ideal customer profile in your home country. Is that true in the US? Is there some tweaking to be done? I mean, what would be the guidance that you would give them?
Yeah, so there is. I mean, and that's one of the challenge I think even U.S. companies have, right?
Yeah,
Trying to figure out who you're selling to, and I
yeah,
think it's changed. If you look at the marketing, the martech space overall, people used to sell to the CMO of a company, of chief marketing officer.
right,
Today, there's directors making decisions. I think
right,
decision making's changed because we've seen, especially since COVID, this acceleration of what companies need to do in, like, let's say, the digital market or other markets that apply to being able to sell more product if you're a retailer, et cetera. It's what might work in, let's say, we're in India and we have this great product and it's selling in the region. There might be a product similar to that in the US.
yeah,
And a lot of times what companies will do is say, okay, it's similar, but we have to pivot when we come to the US. We have to sell it this way here,
yeah,
right? Instead of selling as, let's say, I'm going to bring a simple form, something like campaign management. When I was with Neolane, the French company came to the US,
right,
who got acquired by Adobe. Um, you know, one of their biggest challenge was, a lot of people were doing email in the United States. It was a overcrowded market. In Europe, they were a great email provider. They were doing some great stuff on technology. So in the US, they changed the game and they decided campaign management and marketing automation would be the way that they would go, instead of email. So it's finding that niche that you have, and it takes time to figure out what makes sense in a crowded market if you're getting into one.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's also difficult to do that definition upfront, because you may get a few core set of customers in the beginning, and I guess you are learning all the time and trying to iterate from there. And actually, the ideal customer profile is also a moving target, I guess. The kind of ideal customer you may have when you're at an early stage would be perhaps a little different from growth and in an expansion mode and so on. So, really from here, I wanted to move on to another very interesting area, which is getting a lot of visibility these days, which is really the entire, community of accelerators, right? I mean, there are
Mm-hmm.
accelerators which are mushrooming all over the world, and the US is really growing in a big way as far as the accelerator community is concerned. And I think they're very attractive for international startups, and they could be a good gateway to to actually enter the US market. But one of the things that I'm seeing, Josh, really with many of these accelerators is that they are taking a mass approach. They're now recruiting startups, by the dozens and by the hundreds in a year. And often what happens is that, how much attention can you really give them, right? And then, will you really be able to do anything significant? Because one of the things that accelerators perhaps do reasonably well is bringing potential investors to the table, right? That's one of the things that they do really well. What they also do well is perhaps put you through a 2-month curriculum to, give you, a fairly good sense in terms of building and setting up a business in the US. Really business operations. But I
Right.
think where they struggle with is actually, are they able to open some doors for you? Are they able to do that heavy lifting? Now, accelerators can actually add, really give momentum. But in your view, Josh, what does it take for an accelerator to really be strategic, to a startup?
Yeah, I think the accelerator model, it's a good one, but the challenge, as you just mentioned, is there's too many companies
Yeah,
funneling in these accelerators, right? It's almost become a vehicle for these investment companies to say, okay, we're going to see who ferrets it out and we're going to pick the best,
yeah,
right? And I almost think sometimes it gives a false sense of hope
right,
because you can get one or two clients out of the accelerator, maybe a big client, let's say a Pepsi or a Coke or someone huge, and then all
yeah,
of a sudden you're not selling anything for a year,
right,
right? They will do that. They will get you that one or two anchor clients, um, but that's by design, right? So the key is how do you feed off of that and get more? So
right,
I think it's kind of like what the venture model did a long time ago. If you look at venture companies, they would take 10 companies and one or two would be successful and the other eight would fail, and the founders were all sitting there going, well, but we took the money and you guys didn't help us. That's the
right,
model, right? So accelerators are no different. I think it's a channel. Look, I think you have to look at everything as a channel, a toolkit,
yeah,
right? I think there's a need for accelerators, there's a need for partners, and there's a need for
yeah,
salespeople. You can't just look down one stream. I think it has to
yeah.
be a three-pronged minimum approach.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, but I think there's a great opportunity for an accelerator which can be a little more focused and do the heavy lifting, because they're expensive, right? They take a lot of equity. So uh, I guess there is an opportunity for that, but that's for another discussion.
Sure.
But really, but really, moving on to the other interesting area, and something I guess close to your heart, is also this thing around sales cycles in the enterprise segment, right? Now, if I'm a startup and I'm trying to and I'm working in the enterprise segment, even getting a pilot would be very difficult, because the sales cycles could be quite long.
Yeah.
And maybe you get a pilot, but often investments are budgeted upfront, right? So do you have a share of that budget? Number one. Number two, the decision making is complex because of several stakeholders, and there's a hierarchy in these stakeholders. So, given your experience, what is really the secret sauce of
Mm.
addressing the enterprise space? And if you have any
Yeah.
examples, that would be great. Yeah.
I think if you figure that out, we'll all be rich. The secret sauce. I think everyone's looking for a panacea. I don't think there is one, right? But I think more and more companies are outcome based. It's not about just feature function anymore. It's about
Yeah.
outcomes. And the secret sauce literally is finding a project within a company where you can have an impact and move the needle on an outcome.
Right.
That's it, right? What's the MVP? We talk a lot about MVPs here. It used to be, the minimum viable, product, right? And when you develop software, it's similar. Companies are buying the same way today. They're looking for these MVPs that are going to solve a problem now. I have this problem. Don't tell me all this stuff yet because I'm not there. Tell me, let's focus on, the problems I have now. Let's figure out how to move the needle, and then we could talk about the bigger picture. And part of that is, and I think you brought up a good point, it's become more important than ever to pilot, to do a proof of concept in these companies. So you have to be able to set up your organization in a way that you can do these proof of concepts. And it's hard when you're starting up. You can't do a lot of them because the bandwidth is not there. But it's necessary, especially if you're trying to prove yourself against some of the larger players in the marketplace. It's
Yeah.
important to show them why they can't do it and you can, and that's all about proving it. That's really the niche.
So, are you a fan of maybe free pilots for an early stage company?
I'm a fan of any type of pilot for an early stage company. I always say, look, if you can get the money for the pilot, get the money.
Right.
If you could do a free plot pilot and you're willing to do it, do it. And yeah, absolutely, because that's if you can compete, you could basically, you can make that money up for the pilot if you know that you're in the right place. But again, this goes back to right place, right outcomes, right product, right fit, and all that kind of good stuff. Otherwise, you're at a loss, right? There's no reason to do a pilot just to prove something unless you
That's
believe that you could win the deal.
no, absolutely right. So I was reading recently, Josh, that many of the successful SaaS companies originally started by focus on the SMB segment, because that's a segment where it is relatively easier to have your define your get your product market fit, and perhaps get some pilots going, and then over a period of time, these companies have evolved from SMB to become enterprise, where obviously as they have matured, and because there's a far more investment in terms of really also getting the right level of sales enablement and so on. Yeah, but having said that, I just wanted to touch on another topic, which again I'm sure is close to your heart, which is really the profile of the salesperson, right?
Yeah.
So, what should be the ideal sales profile, for a SaaS company? Two kinds. One is a SaaS company getting into the enterprise space, and another is the SaaS company getting into the SMB space. And so I'd sort of love to hear your thoughts on that.
All right, very good. And I might get out of the sun here in a second because it's getting hot. But if you think about it, for one, you brought up a point of SMB versus enterprise, right?
Right.
If you truly have an SMB product, you built your company and the model on supporting small businesses. Small
Right.
businesses aren't very easy to support, right? Neither are some large companies. Both can kill an organization, right? So I think it is a different skill set. The
Yeah.
skill set for a large enterprise is finding those salespeople that are used to 6 months to a year to 2 year sales cycles. We call these big game hunters, right? They're able
Right.
to go out and
Yeah.
hunt. In the smaller marketplace, you can do a lot of that stuff. You could even have inside salespeople doing that. You could set up an entire inside, world to sell a lot of these. And a lot of these companies are doing that. I mean, the Adobes of the world do it. The Oracles do it. I mean, everyone where they're not traveling, but they're selling inside, right? So that's a smaller company. And I think that if you have a product that meets that, it's an easier way to grow, and they're quicker wins, you know.
Yeah.
The larger enterprises, you need a salesperson. I think with a startup, you need to find a salesperson with 10 plus years, people that are seasoned, maybe even 15 years, that have done it before, and you don't have to train them how to sell. You don't have to train them how to do contracts, etc.
Yeah. So the question really here, Josh, is also that there are lots of SaaS companies which sometimes take a founder-led approach in selling. I mean, they feel that in the early stages, it should be the founder who's actually facing the customer, and he or she would be the best evangelist for the product. But the challenge also is that many of these founders tend to be techies, and then they don't have the relevant selling skills. Now, if you so therefore, I think that's a good point that you make, that it's important to get a seasoned salesperson. But I just want to understand a little bit about, is the profile of the salesperson also changing in a way that I'm hearing that some companies are talking about what they call a full stack salesperson, which is really a salesperson who's able to do multiple things. Because when you're an early stage SaaS startup, you really cannot afford to have too many hands, right? And you cannot have a big team supporting the sales guy. So can the sales guy do pre-sales work, demos, running the sales cycle, closing deals, and so on and so forth? Is that are such professionals easily available, or is it an emerging segment of salespersons in the US right now?
Yeah, I don't buy off on that approach. I think you need to have the technical person, you need to have a salesperson, you need to have, the founders. Look,
Yeah.
early startups that I've worked with, the founders would come out and meet with people, and I would facilitate, because not all founders are great salespeople, right? Some do it brilliantly.
Right.
But, with that season, you have that seasoned salesperson, and you have the founder, and you're going out and doing it. founders, what they used to do is hire solution consultants, these SEs or solution engineers, to
Right.
help them. And like you said, they used to be salespeople. But
Right.
I don't believe that, for one, that doesn't scale. And another thing is, for a lot of the founders, just aren't salespeople, for the most part. And that's okay, right? They're business people. They know how to sell,
Yeah.
but there's a difference in moving it through the cycle, a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And so also you also touched upon inside sales. So does it make sense for a company to have an inside sales team upfront, or do you think it's a better idea after a couple of pilots have been set and there is a better understanding about the target audience and therefore what kind of prospects that one should go after?
Yeah, I mean, look, if I was setting it up from the beginning, right, and I had no clients, I think it's a tiered approach. I think business development people can be inside salespeople as well. And then I think you could have one or two salespeople. But if the salespeople are doing all the cold calling, which is okay, I mean, if that's
Yeah.
what they want to do, that's great. It changes the game a little bit because now you're competing against companies where a business development person's calling up on the phone, then turning it over to a salesperson. That salesperson is viewed as that expert at that point. And I think that's where you run into a challenge, having the salesperson be, the dishwasher, the cook, and all that kind of stuff that they used to talk
Right.
about, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So, moving on to another area, which is really around, how do you, really bring focus? Because the U.S. market is attractive for international SaaS startups. It's massive, but it can also be very distracting because you may be pulled across different opportunities. So one approach that I know of some companies that are entering the US is that they are picking, once they've defined their product market fit, they're really looking at maybe a specific industry, right, to address, and a specific geography, which could be a city or a state. And then get some successes, get some case studies going, and then land and expand kind of a strategy. So is that something that you think is a workable proposition?
Well, I think there's a couple of points you just brought up there. One is, if you look at geography, yes. No one starts in Chicago and works their way out.
Right.
Everyone starts on the coasts and works their way in. And
Right.
usually it happens in New York, Boston, et cetera,
Right.
not even in Silicon Valley,
Right.
right? I don't think that's a good way to start anymore, coming from the West,
Yeah.
right? Now it's all coming from the East.
Correct. Correct.
Um, yeah, and if you look at uh, the so that's the other thing. What was that second question after that? There was the coming from region. What was the other question?
Yeah.
I
The
apologize.
other question was industry. Does it
Industry,
make sense to be a little industries, pick a few industries in early stage, in the initial stage?
especially in the U.S., because you know if you were in the travel industry at the during COVID, you weren't doing pretty well if you bet all your money on travel, right? If you have a travel product, so
Yeah.
you have to kind of be able to pivot really quickly. I think in the it does matter industry. What's the fastest growing industry, and where's that need for an outcome,
Right.
and what industry is not going to kill you?
Right.
You try to get into the financial services marketplace, really difficult marketplace to get into US, right?
Okay.
Because there's a lot of regulations as such. So
Yeah.
I think industry is important, and you have to look at what industries are growing and where your product fits. So absolutely.
Right, right, right. Okay. The other dilemma that a lot of founders have is how do they compensate these early sales hire? What is the kind of compensation plan that will actually work for them? So is there some creative structuring of an incentive plan which really would work in your view?
Yeah, you got to be kind of prepared, what kind of sales rep you're hiring is to pay a higher base salary, right? Because they're going to be doing some missionary work. It's going to take time. And
Right.
generally, the comp plans these days are about 50-50 comp plans, meaning 50% base, 50% upside. If somebody's getting 125,000, they're making 250 if they meet the plan. But what's even more important that is the idea of accelerators, right? Where do you want, once they get to that point, how can you compensate them more?
Right.
So how can we give them more of a percentage as such? But
Right.
generally, it's a 50-50 comp plan. You're compensating them based on each sale that they do, each new
Right.
sale,
Right.
right? And, fairly 50-50.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I finally wanted to talk about one of the points that you mentioned earlier, which was around channel and partnerships, and you did mention that is really an ideal way for a company to look at the shores of the U.S. But partnership comes in different ways. One is a channel which can take you in. The other is there an opportunity for you to do a white label with someone? Is there a way in which your product can be a plug-in into a larger platform, right? But then, it's tough, right? Doing a partnership is very difficult. So, what would be the ways in which, someone can start exploring a partnership, be it with a systems integrator or a consulting firm or another product company, right? With whom you can perhaps plug in or white label.
Yeah, I don't. The white label is a little bit tough. I don't always recommend the white label. Because you have to support it. That
Yeah.
becomes difficult to support. I think the channel strategy is you want people that can walk you in to companies they do business with, and how you compensate is up to you. Do you want to give them a percentage? Are they deployment partners so that can they implement it for you and deploy it?
Yeah.
Um, so how does it benefit them? How does it benefit you? But that again, you look into hiring people, right? So
Right.
then you have to hire a channel person that has done this before and has
That's
channel
right.
partnerships. The salesperson is going to have somewhat of a difficult time doing kind of both things.
Right. Right, I get it. Yeah, so great. So, Josh, any other interesting nuggets or nuances that you would consider as an input, or any other examples that you have of maybe a successful a company which has successfully navigated the waters from startup, and anything that you would like to share from your side?
Yeah, I actually think a company I was with, and I'll mention the name because it's all public.
Yeah.
Neolane, a French company, did an amazing job coming to the U.S. Right,
Right.
and ironically enough, Stefan, one of the co-founders, came over here, moved his family, and he was selling. He was out there selling. So when you
Right.
bring this concept of the CEO selling, he was
Right.
selling. Right, got the
Right.
few deals. Um, but they had a pivot here. They did an approach of both channels where they
Yeah.
established a channel strategy early,
Yeah.
and they got a few key wins of companies that were going to be their cornerstones that they kind of build off of the names. And this was all from the East Coast. So they
Right.
worked out from the East Coast and they started working their way west. They ended up in a successful sale to Adobe
Okay.
of their product. And so it does happen. It's just, again, you need to really know,
Yeah.
you got to know the market.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think I think the U.S. market is very attractive, but it's something that as you rightly mentioned, you have to look at multiple approaches, and rather than just looking at one particular approach, because you really do not know what can perhaps work for you. But it's, I think, very exciting because a lot of companies from India and other growing economies clearly see entry into the US as the ultimate success story for them. And yeah, and so I'm certain our viewers will have got some interesting nuggets from today's discussion. Josh, thank you so much for your time. It was
You're
great.
welcome.
It was great, hearing your views, and hopefully we've given our viewers some good insights in terms of sales strategies for a SaaS startup that they have built and perhaps considering entering the US. So thanks so much, Josh, and thanks so much to our viewers. Keep tuned in to my YouTube channel, Musings with Thomas Abraham. So
Thomas, thanks for having me.
yeah, until next time, yeah, goodbye.